Mic check. Is the audio visible? Is the audio audible? Sorry, is the audio audible? Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Yes, excellent. Let's begin with the session. So today we are going to be looking at international organizations, which I think are important, and these are the ones that need to necessarily be done for the prelims 2020. So let's get right into it and let's figure out what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. Okay. First, let's get some basic concepts out of the way, and then we'll get to the organizations as they are. So, largely speaking, there are three kinds of international organizations that we look at. The first is called an international intergovernmental organization. An organization such as this usually comprises of a bunch of a very large number of countries. Okay, it's an open for all. It's a free invite kind of an organization. The UN is an international intergovernmental organization. So the UN has multiple agencies, multiple sub-agencies, multiple organs. So how the UN largely works is, so the UN has organs, and organs have agencies. Agencies have sub-agencies or specialized agencies. Okay, so the UN becomes a very complicated structure to deal with because sometimes multiple agencies are accountable to multiple organs. So, which is why you, for the purposes of this exam, don't worry and you don't have to do the organizational structure of the UN, which basically means the organizational structure of the UN cannot be asked in the prelims because one organization might be accountable to more than one body in the UN itself. So you don't have to worry about the same. So what basically it means is the UN is an international intergovernmental organization. It comprises of most of the countries. There are largely a number of organs within the UN. For example, the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the UN Secretariats, the International Court of Justice, and we used to have something called the Trusteeship Council. It doesn't exist anymore. Now, within these organs, there are agencies and sub-agencies. So, for example, you would have, let us say, the Narcotics Drugs Commission under the Economic and Social Council, a specialized agency such as the International Labour Organization, which is under, let us say, again, the Economic and Social Council. So these are sub-agencies. I'll give you an example. UN is the larger organization. Okay, is the larger organization. The one of the organs of the UN is called, let us say, ECOSOC. One of the bodies under ECOSOC, which means a body which reports to the ECOSOC once a while, is, let us say, called the International Labour Organization. Clear on this? So this is kind of the way the organizational structure of the UN works. Sometimes this body could also be reporting to, let us say, the UN Secretariat as well. So you don't have to worry about this. You will not be asked this as far as the prelims is concerned in a larger capacity. Okay, so that is it. So what happens? The UN is like a parliament. For example, if India is a parliament and India has a parliament where the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha meet, they decide to vote on a law, they pass the law, and then the president ratifies it. The same thing, which is done at an international level, is what is called global diplomacy. Now, you cannot have an international law as such because the nations have their own sovereignty, so you cannot impose. So what happens is these international governmental organizations, these intergovernmental organizations, they create multiple kinds of documents, right? So, for example, a declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a convention for that matter, the International Convention on, let's say, the International Convention on Biodiversity, for example, a protocol such as the Kyoto Protocol, a covenant, for example, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Now, these are very legally differentiated terms. The difference between a declaration, a convention, a protocol, a covenant for that matter, is not needed for this exam. You will never be asked this because this is a very complicated legal difference. So don't worry about it. All you need to know is that the UN often creates these documents. How Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha MPs vote in the parliament, the countries also vote on these documents. And when the countries vote on these documents, they could either vote, let us say, a no, that we don't want to do this, or they could vote yes. And they could vote yes in two ways. They could either be a signatory to that document, or they can be a ratified member to that document. The basic difference is, if a country is a signatory to that document, then the country has no legal obligation to implement it. Okay, no legal obligation. If the country wants to, if it feels right, they can. But if the country ratifies an international document, then the country has to come back home, make changes to the domestic legal system, make changes to the law, and implement that document. Okay, I'll give you multiple examples for the same. Let us say you would have heard of something called, I'll explain this, don't worry. So, I will explain something called, let us say, uh, the Rio Declaration. Okay, now the Rio Declaration was a document, and in this document, it was decided that every nation should have their own dedicated, specialized environmental redressal agency. Okay, dedicated, specialized environmental redressal agency. All right, I'll just have a look at the sound. Don't worry. Okay. What you can always do is please refresh your screens. Should not be a problem, but I'll just get it checked. Just give me a second. We'll get this checked. All right. Okay. It's fine. I've please also refresh your windows. You should be okay. All right. Thank you. So, for example, let us say there is something called the Rio Declaration. Now, the Rio Declaration was basically a kind of a document which spoke about countries to have dedicated environmental redressal agencies. Now, in their own countries. Now, India decided to ratify this very document. So India came back home, and after coming back home, India said, we will set up an environmental redressal agency. So we passed the law and we created something called the National Green Tribunal because we ratified it. Okay, that's what it meant by ratification. For example, let us say there is another document called the UN Convention on Corruption, which says every country who agrees with this, every country who agrees with this, okay, they have to make certain changes in their domestic corruption laws. Now, India again ratified this, and some time ago, we made amendments to the Prevention of Corruption Act, where we added certain provisions, such as companies could also be charged with corruption, and you'd have to take consent to even prosecute retired officials, and dedicated fast track trials for corruption cases should happen. This is an example of ratification. So, what if a country does not follow after being ratified? Then the UN may take action if they want to, but usually it doesn't really happen. This is all namesake because in international law, you can't, in international diplomacy, you can't wage a war against a country because you said you will ratify it, and we are now saying we're not going to do it. Maybe the country will not receive some funds. Maybe sanctions in very, very extreme cases can be imposed against the countries. But rarely do you see a major action taken because this is a country voluntarily on their own saying, we want to this. Okay, we want to do this. So that is an example of ratification. The best example of that I can give you of it being a signatory is, you would have heard of something called Sustainable Development Goals. Now, India is a signatory to Sustainable Development Goals, which means India says we will implement them as we like it. We will try and implement them, but there is no legal obligation for us to implement them. Clear? International diplomacy is basically the relationships between two countries. That's all that there is to international diplomacy. So, largely speaking, you have an international intergovernmental organization which largely comprises of a large number of countries. They write documents. They sit in their sessions. They sit in their meetings. They sit in their summits. You can call them anything. Please don't worry about the difference because it is not going to be asked in the pre. And they sit and draft what is called a document. A document could be of any kind: declaration, convention, protocol, covenant, could be anything. And then they can vote on it depending on how much do they want to implement it. If the countries say that we want to implement it and we're willing to take responsibility, then a higher level of commitment is ratification. But if a country says, no, we like the idea, we would want to do it, but we want to do it on our own time. We'll see if there is a if there's a reason for it. If you want to do this, then in such a case, they become a signatory. So any timeline, any of this uh, uh, essentially works on a negotiation between the document. There's no fixed timeline. Sachin, you don't need to remember which we are a signatory to and which we have ratified, because you will not be asked this very specifically in the pre, because there are so many documents. You're not supposed to know which we are signatory to and which we are which we've ratified to. Okay, so these are called international intergovernmental organizations. The best example is of obviously the UN. Okay, then we move to multilateral organizations. Now, they're essentially mini UNs or smaller UNs. They have a relatively lesser number of countries. BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, G20, G7, the European Union for that matter. These are very, very small, and because they're very, very small, they comprise of relatively lesser number of countries. Okay, and that's the larger idea. Clear on this? So that's what is meant by multilateral organizations. Okay, now multilateral organizations also have documents like international intergovernmental documents. For example, if the UN has something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you also have something called in EU the EU Charter of, let us say, human rights. So they're essentially the same thing, and they essentially are just different versions of each other. Okay, right. So any country can back out if they don't want to. They can say we don't want to do this, and if the funds have been given to them, then the funds can be returned. So now you should actually have a simple question: if a country has the choice to ratify a document or be a signatory to a document, why would a country want to ratify? Why would a country want to compulsorily take what is called a legal obligation to implement something? What is the larger need behind this? It's because when a country ratifies a document, the country showcases commitment that we are really serious about this, we want to do this, and then multiple agencies such as the World Bank or other funding agencies, they will fund those countries more or on a priority which have ratified a document as opposed to just being a signatory to a document. That is why countries would ratify certain documents that they think that they can implement so that they can get more funds out of it. I'll give you a very simple example. You would have heard of something called the UN Convention on Rights of Child. Okay, in the UN Convention of Rights to Child, it was written that the countries, whichever countries, however countries in the world, should try and give education for free to the children of the country. Now, India actually ratified this. We came back home. We implemented Article 21A. We also passed the Right to Education Act, and we also set up something called the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which is now merged under something called the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. You should be very proud to know that the World Bank actively funds the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. One of the reasons behind this is because India has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Child, and that's the larger idea behind ratification and a signatory. Okay, now bilateral, this could essentially be a relationship between two countries. So it could essentially be, for example, a document called an organization called the International Solar Alliance. You can have as many countries that you want to be a part of this, and there can be agreements between two countries on sharing solar energy resources or solar energy power, like India and France. Yes, Aditya, absolutely, like India and France. So you could say a free trade agreement is basically a bilateral agreement, okay, where two countries have sat down, they said, okay, let's try to figure this out, let's try to look at mutual benefit. So stuff like that happens. This is largely how international organizations work. Okay, now once we've understood this is the basic context and the background to these things. We should now look at what and how should we do this for the prelims exam. Okay, now please listen to this very carefully. Now I need you to just listen to me very carefully, because this will reduce a lot of your work. Just listen to what I'm going to say at the very moment. Okay, let's understand. Right, let's start. There are largely two classes of questions on international relations which are asked. The first are UN and UN related bodies. So, with respect to UN and UN related bodies, there are four things that have to be done, and everything except these four things can fully be ignored. You would not really be asked a question on this. So, let's understand this. First, you must know the headquarter of major UN organizations, the headquarter. That's it. Second, you should know what do they do in one line. What is their basic mandate? You do not have to do the technical details of of the mandate. For example, you don't need to know the technicalities of the World Bank or the IMF, because technically they do almost everything. Anything and everything to do with development and reconstruction is the World Bank. For example, WHO. WHO does everything and anything under the larger global umbrella of health. This could mean emergency health services. This could also mean public health. This could also mean availability of medicines. This could also mean training of doctors. This could mean anything and everything. And that's all that is there. So you don't have to do that. You just have to tell me that, for example, the WHO is your global agency for healthcare policy. That's it. As long as you know that, that should be enough. And you can assume that, yes, these are going to be done. Clear on this? Good. Now, third, important documents if they have been mentioned in current affairs. For example, there was a time where agricultural subsidies was in the news. That year, the prelims had asked a question: a document on regulating agricultural subsidies is written by whom? The answer was the WTO. Similarly, Convention on Biodiversity, written by whom? So the answer was a specific organization. So only those documents have been in the news. I've already given you the documents yesterday, so you don't have to do any more documents than those. You don't have to do any more reports or indices or documents than those. This is more than enough. So, and thankfully, there have not been major conventions which have been in the news as such. So you don't have to worry about it. If there have been a few, I'll anyways inform you, but there have been barely any. Okay. And at all, if India's membership status has been in the news, for example, India is now a member of the core committee. So, for example, if there is a Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha and you have Council of Ministers, in the same way, let us say there is the WHO, which is the Lok Sabha for healthcare of the world, and you have a core council of WHO, which essentially supervises a couple of WHO projects that have been authorized by the general body meeting of the WHO. So it's essentially the same thing. So countries get elected here. This can be done, in multiple ways. And this is something I need you to also understand. Countries can be a member of an organization in three ways. Okay. This is permanent, rotational, and observer. So permanent, let us say the P5 of the UN, or let us say members of the General Assembly. You are permanent members, okay? But rotation would mean, let us say, the non-permanent members of the Security Council, or let us say you've been chosen to be a part of the council of IMF. So you'll be a member of the council for 3 years, and then somebody else will come. You may get elected. Your country may not get elected. An observer is like Attorney General of India. You can participate, but you cannot vote. And an observer to an international organization can be anybody. An observer could be a country. Okay. For example, for a very long time, Palestine has enjoyed observer status in a few organizations. It could also be an NGO. For example, Amnesty International, one of the world's most well-known NGOs, Red Cross, are actually having observer status in the Human Rights Council, in General Assembly, things like that. And sometimes even news organizations. So, for example, there is something called Reuters. Now, Reuters is a news agency that the UN officially recognizes, and the UN often bases its findings on the basis of the Reuters reports. So, in a Human Rights Council, in a Refugee Council, the Reuters will often have an observer status. They can participate in the discussions, but they can't necessarily vote because they do not have voting rights, much like the Attorney General in the country. Okay, so that's essentially how it works. So, uh, as far as UN and UN related bodies are concerned, these are the only four things you have to do: the headquarter, the basic mandate, any important document if it has been in the news, and India's membership status if it has changed. If it has changed, then the body automatically becomes important, right? So, what you don't need to do, what are the things you will ignore as far as international organizations are concerned? I don't need you to know the technical details of the mandate of the organization. I don't need you to know sub organizations of these bodies, specific organizations, committees, their recommendations. I don't need you to know any data that might be coming out of these. You will not be asked this in the exam. Okay, and that's essentially how it works. Financial sources is funding by countries, by the UN, by the countries. Now, any other organization fund itself. Okay, now bilateral. Bilateral gets slightly different because bilateral directly corresponds to a part of a syllabus that says India and her neighbors. So in bilateral, you need to know the headquarters. You need to know the broad mandate. What does it largely do? Technical details are again not required. You also need to know where was the last summit held. Held. This is also very, very important. Where was the last summit held? And if there has been a change in India's membership status, then that particular part does not have to necessarily be done for bilateral. For multilateral, yes, but for bilateral, no, because it doesn't apply. Bilateral is a relationship between X and Y. They're already members, it can't change their membership status. Okay, so that's the larger idea. X and Y. So India's membership status needs to be done for multilateral organizations, but it does not have to be done for bilateral organizations. Clear? As long as, so this is the criteria that I have used, and also explain you the methodology, the sources that I have gone through, so that you understand that this is where I'm coming from, and you can always go back and cross check those sources. So please listen to this fairly carefully. Where have I come up with this from? What is my working behind this? So the first thing that I did was, okay, and I'm going to officially release this, is I went to MEA's website and I opened their annual report. And lucky for us, the annual report of the Ministry of External Affairs was released as recently as 9th March 2020, just a few days ago. So it covered all the major developments that have happened between 2019 and 2020. Okay, and very, very specifically, I went through chapters on international organizations, the UN, bilateral, multilateral, and the major visits. So that was my first. The second was I went to the PMO's website and I checked out where all did our Prime Minister visit, because, of course, now he can't because of coronavirus reasons, but our Prime Minister, our Honorable Prime Minister, is fairly fond of international travel. Okay. Third, I also looked at PIV's website and I cross-referenced this data, and I cross-referenced this data by figuring out what have been reported by the newspapers, what have been reported by the government in official publications. So these were my government sources. Okay. Once I had a master list of organizations, I then cross-referenced them through multiple current affair compilations that I saw in the market. All major institutions, Vision, Vajiram, Forum, Insights, all that I could see, I found them, and I cross referenced and I checked which ones have been actually shortlisted for important reasons. Once all of that was done, then I looked at past year papers and I came up with this, that okay, these are the kind of questions that are actually asking. So it was a three-dimensional process: government documents, current affairs, and past year papers. Okay. And that is how I came to a list of these that I think should be done. All right. And once I have this ready, now I'm giving it to you. This is the standard process, and we'll figure this out right now. Okay. Good. Let's start with the UN related bodies. Why do I think they're important? Why do we need to be done? And let's start. Just what is on the tables are to be done. Nothing more. It's more than enough. You'll be able to manage. Let's start. The first is the International Civil Aviation Organization. It is headquartered in Montreal, which is a city in Canada. Okay. What does the International Civil Organization do? It works with governments and aviation companies for a faster, sustainable, and a more economic civil aviation sector. So, why is this important? And let's figure this out. Okay. This is important because firstly, with coronavirus, there has been a lot of support, a lot of pressure from multiple airline companies and travel agencies to figure out better travel policies. So what does this organization do basically is it coordinates with the civil aviation ministries of multiple countries. It also speaks to the major airlines of the world, and we try to come up with uh, good civil aviation rules, good civil aviation policies, that oh, these are the kind of pricing you should have, these are the kind of penalties you should have, these are the kind of cross sectors that you should have. This is how airlines can work together, share the codes, share the airlines, share the staff, so that your cost of travel has gone down. What can we do more for our passengers? How can air flying, how can flying essentially become more affordable? Things like those. So that's what it does. Now, why does this organization become important? This was not in most of the current affairs booklets, and it is because India has been re-elected to the council of the civil aviation organization, which means an organization is a body of multiple governments, multiple representatives, and there's a council which is like the executive of the body. So India has been re-elected to this, and that is why it becomes important from a current affairs point of view. This is all that you need to know. Nothing more and nothing less. Clear? Next is the International Narcotics Control Board, my favorite organization in the world, if I may. The headquarters of the International Narcotics Control Board is in Vienna, in Austria. So, what does this organization do? This organization essentially coordinates with multiple governments of the world to make sure that the governments are following your international drug control treaties, which means import and export of banned drugs, psychotropic substances. This could also mean hallucinating drugs. So the list of drugs which are banned, from cocaine to ecstasy to, let's say, marijuana to hash, so things like these. So yes, so the International Narcotics Control Board absolutely is essentially what this is. Okay, and India has been re-elected to this, and we are looking at better arrangements. We're looking at better drug control treaties, so that they can be implemented better. That's all. That's all you need to know. Clear this? So, International Narcotics Control Board, headquartered in Vienna in Australia. The mandate is to basically ensure that the countries are, this is like the Interpol of drugs. Okay, the Interpol of drugs. Okay, and it essentially it looks at uh, in making sure that governments are following drug control uh, treaties. They're not violating them. They're complying to what the provisions are. And India has also been re-elected here. Clear? Okay. Now third. Okay, third. Now let's start. Okay, we now move to something called the International Maritime Organization. The International Maritime Organization is headquartered in London, in the United Kingdom. It basically regulates the shipping industry, which means when commercial ships, when merchant ships are traveling from one country to the other, what kind of laws do they have to follow? For example, in case of, we had issues of piracy, the Somalian pilots and stuff like that. So at that time, that the International Maritime Organization said that every commercial ship which was plying through the stretch where there were instances of Somalian pirates would necessarily have to ensure that the ships are carrying a armed guards with them to protect them in case a Somalian pirate attacked the ship. Very recently, just about 3 to 4, I think 4 5 days ago, it was the International Maritime Organization which actually deals with which also released a notification saying no new foreign ships, no new commercial ships will ply during this time. So no new crew will board a merchant ship, and all international shipping travel arrangements have been put on hold because obviously of the corona virus. Now, why is this important? Because India is a member, and last year India has been re-elected as a member of the council, and this International Maritime Organization is a UN special agency. It works under the larger re-election means it was elected the previous time also. Re-election means like how the Modi government has come back into power. 2014 was also BJP government. 2019 is also BJP government. Okay, all right. That's it. Now next is the World Customs Organization. Okay, so IMO is basically International Maritime Organization, regulates the shipping industry. So it means if, for example, armed guards have to be given to ships because of a Somalian threat, or ships have to compulsorily be quarantined in the case of, let us say, a coronavirus. So things like that. Okay, so that's how it works. Right now, next is what is a special agency? Means it's an agency under the UN for a specialized purpose. So a special agency, right? For example, CBI is your general corruption agency, which looks at all cases of central government corruption, whereas the economic offences wing essentially looks at economic corruption. So specifically a specialized agency. So that's what the larger idea is. Now, then we move to something called the World Customs Organization. Okay, so the World Customs Organization, please refresh your slides. It should work. In case it doesn't, we'll let you know. Yes, the Ministry of Shipping represents to the International Maritime Organization. Yes, it also deals with it also regulates and gives guidelines in case of oil spills. Yes, absolutely. Next is the World Customs Organization. It is headquartered at Brussels in Belgium, and it's headquartered at Brussels in Belgium. It's basically to come up with rules and regulations nations to come up with practices that make the customs authorities of other countries, of all countries which are let us say having custom departments. So for example, if you travel internationally, you would see a green channel, a red channel, a blue channel. So if that is the case, then yes, the Civil Aviation Organization is a UN specialized agency, Vinod. Yes. So the World Customs Organization essentially is that. It essentially wants to make the customs officials, the custom laws, more fluid, more cooperative, and more efficient. India has been elected as a director. So the actual story is the head of the Central Board for Direct Taxes, a very senior IRS officer, has now been elected as the director in one of the departments of the World Customs Organization. That is why it is important. This is not a UN specialized agency, which means it is not funded by the UN. It can collaborate with the UN, but it is not a UN agency as such. Okay, and that's the larger idea. Now, next is the UN Habitat. This is actually very important because this is new. The UN Habitat is an organization which is headquartered in Nairobi, which is in Kenya. And what it essentially does is it is basically an organization which wants, it's the international version of housing for all. Okay. It's the international version of housing for all. That's exactly what it is. So it wants to promote the development of socially and environmentally sustainable cities, towns, and communities to make sure everybody has access to housing. This could be done through funds, by collaborating with governments, by providing tie ups with NGOs. And the housing that is given to people should be done in a sustainable manner. It should not be done, yes, Abhishek, International Awas Yojana is what the UN Habitat is. Excellent. Very good. Right. So it essentially looks at sustainable and more accessible housing that can be given. The first ever meeting, the first ever council meeting actually happened last year, and India has been elected to the first ever such council. It's actually a very proud moment for us, and it is something that we should rejoice. So out of all of these, except for the World Customs Organization, everybody else is a UN specialized agency, which means they are directly under the UN and they get funded from the same. So these are important as a part of this. Okay, right. Now, three more, and we're done with UN bodies. There are actually not more that we need to do. Okay, next is the World Meteorological Organization. The World Meteorological Organization is headquartered in Geneva. The World Meteorological Organization is headquartered in Geneva in Switzerland. And this is the interesting part. How India has the National Meteorological Department. How do I explain this to you in a very simple way? This is essentially saying there is something called Interpol, and let us say India has CBI, FBI has, US has FBI, things like that. So they collaborate with each other. So the World Meteorological Organization uh, collaborates with the meteorological organizations of different countries so that meteorological data, weather inputs, hydration effects, the new technologies that are being used for better weather prediction, they're all communicated, and they're all shared with each other because, well, weather is a very strong component of everything. It affects trade, affects environment, it affects habitat, it affects housing, it affects diseases, it affects everything. So this is why, like for example, a tornado or a cyclone or a whirlpool, or let's say a natural calamity has originated in one part of the world. The World Meteorological Organization will coordinate with everybody, share data, will also share data of other countries, and that is essentially how it works. India has been elected as a core council member. It was always a member of the WMO, but it has been elected as a core council member, and it is also a UN specialized agency. Clear? So that's the World Meteorological Organization. From there, we move to the Food and Agricultural Organization. Again, a very important and a very favorite organization of mine because it looks at food. Okay, so let us see this. Yes. So the Food and Agricultural Organization, Council in all states means governing body. Yes, Kumar, it does. So the Food and Agricultural Organization is headquartered at Rome in Italy. Rome is in Italy, and it basically looks at everything to defeat hunger and to make sure that food security exists. So it would essentially work with food corporations, Food Corporation of India, for example, give them better technology, share, let us say, techniques of storing better food distribution, provide food supplies in case of an emergency. So they do all of those things. So it basically is this is these are essentially official international organizations. They're just a larger version of the Food Corporation of India. Yes, so yes, India has been elected as core council member in WMO as well. So, in the Food Agriculture Organization, India has been elected as a core council member. Clear? That's all you need to know. Now, the last part again is slightly important. This is the International Court of Justice, headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands. It essentially looks at the resolution of disputes between UN member states and advisory functions upon request. So let me explain this to you. This gets slightly technical. This means, let us say, yes, FO is a special agency. This basically says country A and country B are having a dispute. Now, both country A and country B have to go to the ICJ. Both of them have to agree to go to the ICJ and allow for the ICJ to be a court. That this is like an international lok adalat, if I have to, like an international lok adalat. Well, both the parties should be willing to go to the lok adalat, and once they have gone, they should accept the verdict of the lok adalat. The same thing happens with International Court of Justice. So both the countries must agree to go to uh, the ICJ, and when they do, once the ICJ has delivered their judgment, then both the countries must also agree to accept that judgment. Because principle number one, territorial sovereignty, that's the golden rule to foreign policy. Okay, and that's the larger idea. Okay, the International Court of Justice. Don't worry, if needed, I will do a special lecture on international judicial bodies, and I will cover what the ICJ is, what the International Criminal Court does, what are specialized tribunals, and all of those things. Okay, so Tanmay, Pakistan has not ratified the Vienna Convention, so it was not obligated. Yes, you don't have to. ICJ is a principal organ of the United Nations. Yes, it is. All right. So that is it. The reason it has been important, of course, is politically speaking, the Kulbhushan Yadav's judgment. Apart from this, Dalveer Bhandari was re-elected as a judge of the Court of Justice, and this was a very heated election. It was a neck to neck between Dalveer Bhandari and a UK judge. The UK judge withdrew, and Dalveer Bhandari became the the judge, one of the judges of the International Court of Justice, right? So that is how it works, right? Yes, Mandeep, Justice Greenwood withdrew. I'm very impressed that you know something like this. Well done, yeah, very good. Here, these are the organizations. Now, this is now just please stop writing. I'm going to teach you something very important. The WHO in the context of coronavirus. Let's understand this. Please pay attention. What you see here is basically how I make my notes. These are digital notes that I make using an app called Notability. So I've just taken an excerpt from my notes and I'm explaining to you, because in the context of coronavirus, the WHO becomes very, very important. So the WHO is basically an international health ministry, so to speak. It's basically an international health ministry. Okay, it is headquartered at Geneva, which is a city in Switzerland, and it essentially looks at everything and anything to do with health. Now, please see what we're going to discuss now. Okay, so let's start. The disease is called COVID 19. It's called the coronavirus 19. Why 19? Because it originated, the first reports came in the latter end of 2019. Okay. The virus is called SARS CoV 2. This means severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. So the virus is called severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. More often than not, the name of the disease and the name of the virus can be two different names. The reason is the names of the diseases are always simpler because you're able to create awareness and you can create discussion. Whereas the names of the viruses are always technical, very biologically correct. The same way as HIV and AIDS. HIV is the virus, AIDS is the disease. So that's how it works. Now, the prelims part of this is important. How are viruses named? Viruses are actually named by an organization called ICTV. This stands for the International Commission on Taxonomy of Viruses. Taxonomy basically means is another word for nomenclature. It is named by an organization called ICTV, which is Commission on the Taxonomy of Viruses. And viruses are the names which are named based on their genetic structure to facilitate the development of the cure. And that is why the name of the virus is linked to SARS, because the genetic structure of coronavirus is actually similar to that of SARS. Now, SARS was a very dangerous disease which had an outbreak in the year 2003, and SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. So, coronavirus is actually a strain, is a similar version of is related to SARS. So that's the name of the virus. The full name is SARS-CoV-2. So severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. But the names of the diseases, this is important. The names of the diseases are actually given by the WHO, the World Health Organization. And as I told you, organizations have documents. So there is a document written by the WHO called ICD, the International Classification of Diseases. And according to this document, the diseases are named. Okay, the names of the diseases are decided. That is why the names are simpler, because they are able to facilitate awareness. Because it's easy for us to say COVID-19 than to say SARS-CoV-2. It's easy for us to inform as many people as we can by just saying coronavirus, COVID-19, and things like that. And these names are built on the guidelines given by the World Organization on Animal Health and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. This is also why the UN becomes important. This is very similar to, yes, like the Red Book of IUCN. Okay, so that's the larger idea. So the WHO decides this on the basis of a document called ICD, and that book is actually written by is written by after taking inputs from the World Organization on Animal Health and the Food and Agricultural Organization. Like same way we say DPSPs, Directive Principles of State Policy, are taken from the Irish Constitution, and the Irish copied it from the Spanish Constitution. So in the same way, the WHO takes it from the international classification of diseases, and the international classification of diseases takes reference from the World Organization on Animal Health and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. So that is why. Why? Because sometimes there can be nutrition related diseases also. That is why the Food and Agricultural Organization. Okay, so that's the idea. This is something you must know. This is actually very, very important for the prelims exam. Okay, now just the last few bunch so that we are done, and this is important. Yes, the World Organization of Animal Health is a UN body. First, International Solar Alliance. This is very, very important. It is headquartered at Gurugram in Haryana. It's now called Gurugram. It's not Gurgaon, because changing the name makes a lot of difference. So that is why. Okay. So, Gurugram and not Gurgaon. Now, what is the mandate of the International Solar Alliance? And let's figure this out. So, what does the International Solar Alliance do? It essentially, very, very simply, it essentially looks at an efficient exploitation of solar energy to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Okay, it looks at efficient exploitation, basically promotion of solar energy. And second, it wants to generate $1 trillion in investments. India has already offered 100 crore to invest in solar energy projects. These are some contextual facts that you need to know. It was established in 2015 and the framework agreement came in 2018. You will not be asked this, but just generally so you understand this. Any country can become a member, but only those countries which lie between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn will have voting rights, because this is where sunlight happens. If your country is in the frigid zone, then you will not have enough sunlight. So if you do not have sunlight, then how will you have solar energy? Because for solar energy, you need sunlight. That is why. Okay. Yes. uh, what is interesting is, the International Solar Alliance is the only organization in the world which is headquartered fully and entirely in India. Okay, now this was originally how it was set up. Now, no doubt, Abhinandan, we're looking at extending it, but when we extend it, they will not have full membership rights. Remember, I spoke about permanent, rotational, and observer. So that's how we are looking at it. Okay. CDRI is Central Drug Research Institute. It's a national body. Okay. The next is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There has been a question on this in the prelims before, which is why the likelihood of these being asked is fairly less. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the voting rights, because these voting rights have been defined on the basis of a contribution and the geographical location. All you need to know is that a country can become a member, which is originally the case between Cancer and Capricorn. Now it will depend on other factors as well. Now, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, its headquarters is Beijing in China, and the last summit that had happened was in Kyrgyzstan. It essentially looks at political, economic, social, and cultural cooperation within a specific geographical area. Okay, so it's essentially looking at the Asian belt in and around. So China and Russia, smaller Central Asian countries such as Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Now, what you need to know is very recently India and Pakistan were introduced here as full members, as the newest members. So that is why this organization becomes important. You may need to remember this. I rarely don't recommend this, but you need to remember this. No need to remember the year of uh, uh, formation. Okay, so that's it. And then BRICS. BRICS is again headquartered at Shanghai in China, and the previous summit had happened in Brazil, where our prime minister had attended personally, because it's important, and it's nothing but an association of major international emerging economies. Now they look at everything, look at economic cooperation, they look at human rights, they look at development, everything. So you don't have to worry about the mandate of these things. Okay, so these are the multilateral organizations that you need to know. Now there are some safe zones. There are some safe zones. Okay, now these are your safe zones. BIMSTEC, IAEA. BIMSTEC essentially stands for the Bay of Bengal Initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation. It is headquartered at Dhaka, and it essentially India. It is essentially where India is a member. It essentially look at countries in and around the Bay of Bengal. The International Atomic Energy Agency is your national agency, your international organization for nuclear and atomic energy control. G20 and G7 are, again, India had participated in them last year, and G20 and G7 are multilateral organizations, and that's all that there is. The International Monetary Fund, which I'm sure in your economics classes you would have studied broadly, that International Monetary Fund has a quota system. It is headquartered in Washington D.C. If a International Monetary Fund is like a kitty party. Okay, which basically means if a country X has given 100 rupees and country Y has given 1000 rupees, then country X can get 200 rupees as loan and country Y can get 2000 rupees as loan. This is basically what is called a quota system, and the IMF has it. The reports that are important I have already given to you in the previous class. No, SARC and ASEAN are not important. 2018 ASEAN was important because we had covered 25 years. SARC, there's no major development that has happened in SARC, which is why it's not important. Okay, the World Bank is basically your international bank for reconstruction and development. The reports of the World Bank are important. The reports of IMF are important, which I've already discussed with you. And Asian Development Bank and Asian Infrastructure Bank, just look at the headquarters and the primary mandate, and that should be enough. You don't need to do anything more on this. The Financial Action Task Force does not need to be done. It is a part of your economic. It's not a larger international organization. Okay, clear, and that's the larger idea, and that is it. That is all you need to do. I will upload subsequent documents also if you need on the Telegram channel. Now please let me just look at a couple of questions that have been asked so I can answer them as much as I can. Okay. Madhu Parna has asked, recently Prime Minister Modi did a virtual video conference on SARC. Anything on that? Yes, good job. Good to know that video conferencing is happening. Good to know that government has a good internet connection, primarily because it might be using Geo. So yeah, so good job. So that is that, but it does not have to specifically done for the exam as such. How to remember these mandates? The Kunal, how to remember these mandates is very easy actually. You just have to go through the names. International Maritime Organization, for example, means looking at the shipping industry. That's it. So the names are enough, right? Uh, what about SARC fund that our PM has called for? This is a very common practice. So when the fund happens, but a fund is basically a country is putting in money. That is it, nothing else. Coalition on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is a sub organization built under a larger organization, so not required. 100 crore in rupees or dollars, but a crore is used for rupees only. Na? You don't say 100 crore dollars, you say $1 million, but you say 100 crore rupees. So that is why. Okay, so that is how. Uh, now, okay. Uh, No, we don't need to refer to the Bishkek Declaration. It's not needed. Financial Action Task Force, because the mandate is very clear. It's actually looking at checking transnational economic offenses. Okay. Sir, Equator has a lot of sunlight. Why does it not have voting rights? Equator has sunlight. See, it is between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. So last I checked, Abhishek, Earth was round. Okay. Now this was the equator. This is now Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn are here. So people here will also have voting rights. So don't worry about this. Okay, it is there. It's a part of it. Okay, I'll go through the questions and I will post the answers to these questions on the discussion forum, and I'll make an FAQ of this, and I will release the FAQ uh, 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 on on on. Uh, on the channel so that you can have a look at them. Should not be a problem at all. RCP is a multilateral agreement between a bunch of organizations. It's essentially a preferential. There's nothing to ask because firstly, RCP is a counter to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. India was a member of it. That is essentially why it was needed. Don't worry, on the Telegram channel, I'll upload this. Don't worry, and this video will go on YouTube. When it goes on YouTube, I'll answer these questions on the YouTube channel also, on Unacademy YouTube channel, which is called Unacademy Articulate, because it's a very interesting word. Okay, so that's how it is. Guys, Tarun, okay, don't worry, I'll answer your question. Tarun, don't worry, Tarun, I'll look for your questions. Are you and body? Tarun, I can't find your questions. There are far too many questions. Just please post your questions here, and I will answer these questions clearly. So don't worry. Uh, Okay, I'll answer these questions. I'll get back to these questions in detail, so don't worry. Okay, and I'll give you subsidiary arguments to this. Now, before we move on, there's something that we need to speak to you about. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. I will see you guys again tomorrow at 4 p.m. and we will cover extra constitutional bodies, the ones that mostly are not covered in proper detail, or they're often done in too much detail. So I will cover things like Lokpal, the Central Information Commission, the State Information Commission, which is also called the Information Commission, the CBI, the CV, the CBI, CID, a couple of statutory regulatory bodies such as SEBI, TRI, IRDA. Just two to three lines on this because these are also asked in this exam. Okay, so check and we'll get this right. Okay, so thank you guys. Really nice to see all of you. And this should be enough. No EU, there's nothing major that has happened. You don't have to do EU. Okay, all right. So don't worry. Also, if there's a lockdown in Delhi, you will be informed of the same. Please have faith in the government because we should, and things are going to be fine. All right. Thank you so much. See you guys. Bye bye. See you tomorrow at 4 p.m. See you.